If a man like Sebastian Hale looks at you twice, it's already too late. I didn't understand that the first day I walked into his house, carrying a canvas bag that held everything I owned, telling myself this was just another job, just another family, just another chance to stay invisible. The estate didn't feel like a home. It felt like something watching back, glass walls stretching 2 stories high, marble floors too clean, too quiet, like even footsteps were careful here. I remember checking my reflection in the dark window before knocking, smoothing down my sleeve, making sure it covered everything, because that was the rule. Always cover, always hide, always pretend nothing happened. The door opened before I could knock twice. A man in a tailored suit nodded once, and stepped aside like he already knew who I was, like I had been expected long before I arrived. That was the first thing that felt wrong. The second was the silence. Not peaceful silence. Controlled silence. The kind that belongs to people who don't raise their voices because they don't need to. Lucas Hale was the reason I was there. 6 years old, they said. Doesn't speak much. Needs structure. Needs patience. They didn't say he needed someone who understood what it meant to go quiet when the world got too loud. I saw him sitting by the window, small frame curled into the corner of a leather chair that probably cost more than my rent for a year. His eyes flicked up when I entered. Green. Sharp. Watching. Measuring. He didn't smile. Not at first. I didn't try to make him. I just sat on the floor, cross-legged, like I always do, and took out a pack of colored pencils. You don't force a child like that. You wait. Minutes passed. Then his hand moved. Slow. Careful. He reached for a green pencil. That was the first moment I knew I would stay longer than I planned. What I didn't know was that someone else had been watching too. Sebastian Hale didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. You feel a man like that before you see him. The air shifts. The room adjusts. I noticed it when Lucas suddenly went still, his fingers tightening around the pencil. I looked up, and there he was, standing just inside the doorway, perfectly still, like he had always been. There, and I had simply failed to notice. Tall. Impossibly composed. Dark suit that looked like it belonged in a magazine, not a living room. But it wasn't the suit. It was his eyes. Cold. Focused. Not cruel. Not exactly. Just precise. Like everything he looked at became a problem to solve. He didn't speak. Not to me. Not to Lucas. He just watched. And somehow that felt louder than words. I dropped my gaze first. People like him expect that. I had learned that lesson a long time ago. The days settled into a rhythm after that. Morning routines. Quiet meals. Lucas would sit closer each day, sometimes leaning against my arm, sometimes just existing near me like proximity was enough. He still didn't speak much, but he made sounds now. Small ones. Enough to feel like progress. Enough to make me believe I was doing something right. I kept my distance from Sebastian. That was easy. He was rarely around during the day, and when he was, the house seemed to reorganize itself around him. Staff moved differently. Conversations stopped. Doors closed softer. The kind of power that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't have to. I wore long sleeves every day. Even when the afternoon sun turned the glass walls into a greenhouse. Even when sweat gathered at the base of my neck and ran down my spine. It didn't matter. Some things are not meant to be seen. That was the rule. The rule kept you safe. Until it didn't. It happened on a Thursday. Late afternoon. Lucas was building something with wooden blocks on the floor, focused in a way that made the rest of the world disappear. I was carrying a tray from the kitchen, just water and sliced fruit. Nothing heavy, nothing complicated. I don't know what I caught my sleeve on. Maybe the edge of the table. Maybe nothing at all. But I felt the fabric tug, just enough, just long enough. The tray slipped. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just enough to break the silence. Glass tilted. Water spilled. And my sleeve slid back. I froze. Not because of the mess. Because of what wasn't covered anymore. My wrist. My forearm. The lines I never let anyone see. Old marks. Faded. And newer ones I hadn't figured out how to explain yet. For a second, I thought Lucas hadn't noticed. Then I realized it didn't matter if he had. Because someone else had. I felt it before I saw him. That shift in the air. Again. Slower this time. He was closer than before. I looked up, and Sebastian Hale was standing just a few feet away, eyes locked exactly where I didn't want them. Not moving. Not blinking. Just seeing. I pulled my sleeve down too fast. Too late. It's nothing, I said. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. He didn't respond. Didn't nod. Didn't look away. His gaze lifted from my wrist to my face, and for a moment, I felt like he was reading something I hadn't said out loud. Accident. I added, because silence felt dangerous. Because explanations always came too late. Because lies were easier than truth. Still nothing. Then, quietly, almost like he was testing the words, he asked, "Who did that to you?" My chest tightened. Not from fear. From something worse. Recognition. I shook my head. No one. A pause. Long enough to stretch. Long enough to feel like a decision was being made somewhere I couldn't see. Lucas shifted beside me, his small hand brushing against mine, grounding me just enough to breathe. Sebastian's eyes flicked to him for a fraction of a second, then back to me. And something in his expression changed. Not softer. Not kinder. Just decided. "Clean this up," he said finally, voice calm, controlled, like nothing had happened at all. Then he turned and walked away. That should have been the end of it. That's what I told myself as I wiped the water from the floor, as I kept my sleeve pulled tight, as I focused on Lucas and the small, fragile progress we were making. But that night, the house didn't feel the same. The silence wasn't controlled anymore. It was waiting. I didn't see him again before I went to bed. But I felt it. Like something had been set in motion. Like a door had opened somewhere I couldn't close. And somewhere in that house, I knew, Sebastian Hale wasn't forgetting what he saw. He was looking for answers. And men like him, they don't stop once they start. I knew he had not let it go. Men like Sebastian Hale did not ask questions they intended to forget. They asked because they were already looking for the answer somewhere else. The next morning, the house felt different. Not louder. Not colder. Just aware. Like every movement had weight. Like every step was being counted. I woke before sunrise, the way I always do when I am somewhere unfamiliar, listening to the quiet hum of a place that was never truly asleep. The sheets were too soft. The room too large. Even the air felt expensive. I pulled on my sweater before leaving the room, fingers checking the sleeve twice, making sure it sat exactly where it needed to. Covered. Always covered. Downstairs, the kitchen staff moved in quiet coordination, eyes lowering slightly when I passed. That had not happened before. Yesterday, I was just the nanny. Today, I was something else. Something noticed. Lucas was already awake, sitting at the long dining table with a glass of milk in front of him, untouched. His eyes found me immediately. That same sharp green. That same quiet understanding. I sat beside him without speaking, sliding the glass closer to his hand. He did not reach for it. Instead, his fingers curled into the fabric of my sleeve, small and careful, like he was asking a question without words. I stilled. "It is okay," I whispered, more for myself than for him. He did not let go right away. Then footsteps. Measured. Unhurried. I did not need to look to know who it was. The room adjusted before he even entered. Sebastian Hale stopped at the head of the table, his presence settling over the space like something permanent. He looked at Lucas first. Always Lucas first. Then, slowly, his gaze shifted to me. Not to my face. Not entirely. It dropped, just for a second, to my sleeve. I felt it like pressure. Like heat without warmth. I kept my posture still. Neutral. Invisible. That was the goal. "You are early," he said. His voice was calm. Even. Like the night before had never happened. "So is he." I replied quietly, nodding toward Lucas. A flicker of something passed through his expression. Approval, maybe. Or calculation. It was hard to tell with men like him. He stepped closer, close enough that I could catch the faint scent of his cologne, something clean and sharp, like it belonged to a world I had never lived in. "He does not usually come down before 8, he said. Lucas leaned slightly into my side. Not dramatic. Just enough. Sebastian noticed. Of course he did. He noticed everything. "He slept better," I said. "That is new." Another pause. Not awkward. Intentional. He was filing it away. Every detail. Every shift. "And you?" he asked. The question was simple. The way he said it was not. I met his eyes for half a second, then looked away. I slept fine. A lie. A small one. But lies have weight. And I had the feeling he could measure it. He did not call it out. He never would. Instead, he nodded once, like he had confirmed something only he understood. "Good," he said. Then he turned to leave. Just like that. Conversation over. Control maintained. But as he walked away, I noticed something else. Two men I had not seen before standing near the far hallway. Suits. Still. Watching without looking like they were watching. That was not for Lucas. That was new. That was because of me. The day moved forward anyway. Breakfast. Reading time. Quiet play. Lucas stayed close, closer than before, like something in him had shifted overnight. He followed me from room to room, never speaking, but never far enough that I could pretend he was not there. Around noon, he brought me a piece of paper. A drawing. Simple. Lines and shapes. But I recognized it immediately. A small figure. Another beside it. And a third, taller, standing just behind them. He pointed to the smaller one. Then to me. Then to the taller one. His father. I swallowed. That is us. I asked softly. He nodded once. Then, after a hesitation, he reached for my sleeve again. This time, he did not pull. He just held it. Careful. Like he understood it mattered. Like he knew there was something underneath that should not be seen. Children notice more than we think. You are safe here, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. I was not sure if I was talking to him or to myself. The front door opened sometime in the afternoon. I heard it from the living room, the subtle shift in sound that told me someone had arrived. Not staff. Not routine. Something else. Lucas froze beside me. His hand tightened in the fabric of my sleeve. That was my first warning. The second was the way the house went still. Not quiet. Still. Like everything was waiting for a signal. I stood slowly, my heart picking up just enough to feel it in my throat. Stay here, I told Lucas gently. He did not move. Of course he did not. I stepped into the hallway, just enough to see the entrance without being fully seen. Two men in suits stood near the door. And between them, a familiar shape. Not close enough to recognize clearly. Not yet. But something about the posture made my chest tighten. Made old instincts wake up. The kind that tell you to leave before you understand why. I took a step back. Too late. Amara. His voice. Low. Careful. Like he was testing whether he still had the right to say my name. My blood ran cold. Lucas made a small sound behind me. The first real sound I had heard from him all day. I turned slightly, just enough to see Sebastian at the far end of the hall. He had not raised his voice. Had not moved quickly. But everything about him was focused. Controlled in a way that felt sharper than before. His eyes flicked from me to the man at the door. Then back again. And in that moment, I understood. This was not an accident. This was not a coincidence. He had not just been looking for answers. He had found something. And he had brought it here. Not for me. For himself. Do you know him? Sebastian asked. Calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that does not leave room for lies. I could feel Lucas behind me. Close. Small. Listening. I closed my eyes for a second. Just one. Long enough to choose. I used to, I said. My voice did not shake. That surprised me. Sebastian studied my face. Then the man. Then back again. And something in his expression shifted. Not anger. Not exactly. Something colder. More final. Like a decision had just locked into place. Good, he said quietly. Then we will make sure he understands something. He stepped forward. And the entire house seemed to move with him. He did not raise his voice, but everything changed the second he stepped forward. Like the house itself understood something irreversible had just begun, and I felt it in my chest before I could explain it. That quiet shift from control to consequence. The kind you do not come back from. The man at the door straightened, like he had not expected to be seen this clearly, like he had walked into a place he thought he could still influence. But this was not his world anymore, and Sebastian Hale made that obvious without saying a word. I stayed where I was, Lucas pressed against my side, his small hand gripping my sleeve tighter than before, like he could feel the tension even if he did not understand it, like something in him knew this moment mattered. You should not be here, Sebastian said, his tone even, almost polite, but there was something underneath it, something that did not leave space for negotiation. The man glanced at me, then back at Sebastian, uncertainty flickering across his face in a way I had never seen before, and that alone told me everything had already changed. I just wanted to talk, he said, his voice softer than I remembered, careful, like he was trying to step around something invisible. I felt my throat tighten. That voice used to control entire rooms. Used to decide what was real and what was not. Used to make me question my own memory. But here, it sounded smaller. Less certain. You have said enough, Sebastian replied. No anger. No escalation. Just a line drawn so clean it did not need to be repeated. The silence that followed stretched, heavy but precise, like a pause in a conversation that only one person was allowed to continue. I realized then that Sebastian was not reacting. He had already decided how this would end. He turned slightly, not breaking eye contact, and the two men by the door shifted just enough to close the space behind the visitor, not aggressive, not forceful, just final. A boundary made visible. My pulse picked up, not from fear, but from something I could not name yet, something unfamiliar, like standing behind a wall you did not build but suddenly trusted. The man looked at me again, longer this time, like he was searching for something in my face, something that used to be there, something he expected to still have access to. Amara, he said again, softer now, like the name itself might still carry weight. I did not respond. That was new. Before, silence would have been impossible. Before, I would have filled it, explained it, apologized for it. Now I just stood there. Sebastian noticed. Of course he did. His gaze flicked toward me for half a second, just enough to register the shift, then back to the man in front of him. You will not contact her again, he said. Not a threat. Not a warning. A statement. The kind that sounds like it has already been enforced somewhere else. The man exhaled slowly, tension settling into his shoulders, like he was beginning to understand the rules had changed without his permission. You do not know the whole story, he said, trying once more, but there was no conviction behind it now, just habit. Sebastian took one step closer. That was all. No sudden movement. No raised voice. But the air tightened instantly, like pressure building in a sealed room. I know enough, he said. And that was the end of it. No argument followed. No back and forth. The man hesitated, then nodded once, not in agreement, but in recognition, like he had reached the point where pushing further would not change the outcome. He turned and walked out, the door closing behind him with a quiet finality that echoed louder than any slammed door could have. The house did not relax immediately. It held the tension for a few seconds longer, like it needed to confirm the moment had truly passed. Then, slowly it settled. The two men by the door stepped back into their previous positions, invisible again, like they had never been there. Sebastian did not move right away. He stood there, still facing the door, like he was making sure it stayed closed in every sense of the word. Then he turned. His eyes found me. Not my sleeve this time. My face. I felt exposed in a different way, like he was not just looking for answers anymore, but measuring what came next. Lucas shifted behind me, his grip loosening just slightly, but he did not let go. Sebastian's gaze dropped to him, and something in his expression softened, just a fraction, just enough to change the temperature of the room. Are you all right? He asked. The question was directed at Lucas, but it reached me anyway. Lucas did not speak. He never did in moments like this. Instead, he leaned closer into my side, his small shoulder pressing against my arm. Sebastian watched that, and I saw it, the realization, the connection forming in real time. Not just about Lucas. About me. About what had been hidden and what was now impossible to ignore. He should not have come here, Sebastian said quietly, more to himself than to me. I swallowed, my voice steady even though my chest felt tight. He would have kept trying. Sebastian nodded once, like that confirmed something. Then he stepped closer, not invading, not forcing, just closing the distance enough that his presence felt intentional. Not anymore, he said. 3 words. Simple. Final. But something in the way he said them settled deep, like a promise I had not asked for, but could not ignore. I looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time, I saw past the control, past the precision, to something else underneath. Not kindness. Not exactly. Something more dangerous than that. Something that did not ask if you needed help. Something that decided you did. Lucas tugged at my sleeve again, softer this time, grounding me. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. You did not have to do that, I said quietly. Sebastian held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Yes, he said. I did. No explanation. No justification. Just certainty. And for the first time in a long time, I did not argue with it. The house felt quieter after that, but not in the way it used to, not controlled, not distant, but watchful, like something had shifted beneath the surface and everyone could feel it even if no one said a word. I tried to go back to routine. That was the safest thing to do. Structure. Predictability. The same steps, the same hours, the same careful distance I had built around myself long before I ever stepped into this place. Lucas stayed close the rest of the afternoon, closer than before, like he needed to confirm I was still there, like the moment at the door had unsettled something in him that words could not fix. He sat beside me on the floor, his small shoulder pressed against mine, while we lined up wooden blocks in quiet patterns, his fingers slower, more deliberate, like he was thinking through something he could not explain. Every now and then, his hand would drift toward my sleeve, not pulling, not exposing, just touching, like he needed to know it was still there, that I was still the same. I let him. For him, I would always let him. But inside, something felt different. Not fear. Not exactly. Something closer to awareness. The kind that settles in after you realize you are no longer invisible. That night, I stayed in the common area longer than usual, waiting until Lucas fell asleep on the couch with his head resting against my arm, his breathing finally steady, his small hand still loosely curled in the fabric of my sleeve. I did not move right away. I did not want to wake him. I did not want to disturb the one part of the day that still felt simple. When I finally stood, carefully lifting him into my arms, I felt the weight of the house again, not heavy, not oppressive, just present, like it was paying attention to what came next. His room was dim, soft light spilling from a lamp near the bed, shadows stretching across the walls in long, quiet lines. I laid him down slowly, adjusting the blanket over his shoulders, my hand lingering for a second on his hair the way I had learned calmed him. He did not wake, but his fingers tightened briefly around the edge of my sleeve before relaxing again. Even in sleep, he held on. I stepped back, pulling my arm free gently, and turned toward the door. That was when I saw him. Sebastian stood just outside the room, leaning slightly against the frame, arms crossed, posture relaxed in a way that did not match the sharpness in his eyes. He had been there longer than I realized. Watching. Again. He trusts you, he said quietly. His voice was softer than before, less like a command, more like an observation he had not decided what to do with yet. I nodded once, keeping my voice low so it would not carry into the room. He just needs consistency. Sebastian's gaze shifted past me, toward Lucas, then back again. He has had that before, he said. There was something in the way he said it. Not doubt. Not disagreement. Something heavier. Like consistency had not been enough. I did not ask. Some things are not questions you earn answers to. Instead, I stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind me halfway, leaving it open just enough to hear if Lucas stirred. Sebastian did not move. He watched me the same way he always did now, like I was a variable in something he had not fully calculated yet. You should not have let him come inside, I said quietly. It was not an accusation. It was a truth I could not ignore. Sebastian tilted his head slightly, considering me, like he was deciding whether I had the right to say that. He would have kept trying, he replied, echoing my own words from earlier. I prefer to see things directly. Of course he did. Control was not something he gave away. Not to strangers. Not to situations. Not to anything that might slip beyond his reach. And now? I asked. The question felt heavier than it should have. Not just about today. About everything that followed it. Sebastian's eyes held mine for a moment longer than necessary. Now he understands the boundary, he said. Simple. Final. Like the outcome had already been secured in ways I could not see. I should have felt relieved. Maybe part of me did. But another part, quieter, more cautious, knew that boundaries like that did not come without weight. And I was standing in the middle of it. You did not have to involve yourself, I said. The words came out softer this time, less defensive, more uncertain. Sebastian's expression did not change immediately. Then, slowly, something shifted. Not irritation. Not pride. Something closer to clarity. I did not involve myself, he said. You were already involved. That landed differently. I did not have an answer for that. Because he was not wrong. Silence stretched between us, but it was not uncomfortable. It was full. Like both of us were standing in the same realization, just from different sides of it. Sebastian straightened slightly, uncrossing his arms, his posture shifting from observation to decision. Tomorrow, he said, you will not leave the property alone. I blinked, caught off guard by the certainty in his tone. I was not planning to, I replied. He nodded once. Good. No explanation. No room for discussion. Just a line drawn. The same way he had drawn it earlier, the same way he always would. I should have pushed back. I should have reminded him that this was a job, that I was not part of his world, that I did not need his rules. But the words did not come. Because part of me understood. Part of me had already adjusted. That was the most unsettling part. Sebastian studied me for a moment longer, like he noticed that shift too, like he recognized the moment something in me had stopped resisting. Then he stepped back, giving me space in a way that felt deliberate, like even that was a choice. Get some rest, he said. It sounded simple, ordinary, but coming from him, it felt like something else. Not a suggestion, not exactly a command, something in between. I nodded once, turning toward my room, my mind quieter than it should have been. As I walked away, I felt it again, that awareness, that sense that the line between his world and mine had blurred in a way that could not be undone. And for the first time, I was not sure if I wanted it to be. The next morning did not feel like a new day. It felt like a continuation of something that had already started moving, something quiet but certain, like a decision had been made and the world was slowly adjusting around it. I woke before my alarm again, the soft light of early morning slipping through the tall windows, painting long shadows across the floor that made the room feel even larger than it was. For a moment, I stayed still, listening, waiting for the familiar tension that usually followed me into every new place. It was there, but different, less sharp, less immediate. That unsettled me more than anything else. I got dressed slowly, pulling on my sweater, checking the sleeves like I always did, smoothing the fabric down over my wrists until there was nothing left to see. The routine should have grounded me. It always had. But now it felt like something I was holding on to instead of something that protected me. Downstairs, the house was already awake, but the energy was different from the day before. Not tense. Organized. Intentional. I noticed it in the way the staff moved, more deliberate, more aware, like instructions had been given without needing to be repeated. I noticed it in the way the doors opened before I reached them, in the way the hallway cameras adjusted slightly as I passed, subtle but unmistakable. I was not imagining it. Something had changed overnight. Lucas was in the sunroom this time, sitting on the floor, with a stack of books spread around him in uneven piles, his small fingers flipping through pages without really reading them, like he was searching for something he could not name. When he saw me, he did not hesitate. He stood up immediately and crossed the room, pressing himself into my side with quiet certainty, like he had already decided where he belonged. I rested my hand lightly on his shoulder, feeling the way he leaned into it, steady, grounded, present. "Good morning," I said softly. He did not answer, but he did not need to. He never did. I guided him back to the floor, sitting beside him, letting the silence settle into something familiar again. For a few minutes, it worked. The world narrowed down to simple things. Pages turning, light shifting, breathing steady. Then I felt it. Not a sound, not movement, just that shift. The one I was starting to recognize before I even saw him. Sebastian stood in the doorway again, the same as the night before, except this time there was nothing hidden about it. He was not observing quietly. He was present, deliberate, watching without pretending otherwise. "You are adjusting," he said. It was not a question. I looked up, meeting his gaze for a second longer than I had before. "So is he," I replied, nodding toward Lucas. Sebastian's eyes followed the motion, resting on his son for a moment, and something in his expression changed again. That same small shift I had started to notice, like control making room for something else he did not fully trust yet. He does not usually. He paused, like he was choosing the right word. Attach. I felt Lucas's fingers curl into my sleeve again, gentle but firm. I did not move them away. "He feels safe?" I said. The words came out quietly, but they carried weight. Sebastian looked at me then, really looked, and I saw it again, that calculation, but layered now with something more personal, something that did not belong to business or control or strategy, something closer to recognition. "And you?" he asked again. The same question as yesterday, but this time, it landed differently. I hesitated, just for a second, long enough for the truth to surface before I could hide it. "I am getting used to it," I said. Not a lie, not entirely. Sebastian held my gaze. A moment longer, then nodded once, like he had expected that answer even before I said it. "Good," he said again. But this time, it sounded less like confirmation and more like approval. That should not have mattered. But it did. I felt it settle somewhere deeper than I wanted to admit. He stepped into the room then, closing the distance in a way he had not done before, not invading, not overwhelming, just present in a way that made it impossible to pretend we existed in separate spaces anymore. Lucas went still for a second, then shifted slightly closer to me, his body pressing into my side like a quiet anchor. Sebastian noticed. Of course he did. He does not do that with anyone else, he said. I nodded. He does not have to. Silence again. But this time, it felt different. Not cautious. Not tense. Something closer to understanding. Sebastian's gaze dropped briefly to my sleeve. Just a flicker, but enough for me to feel it. That awareness again. That thread connecting everything back to the moment I could not take back. I resisted the instinct to adjust the fabric. Instead, I kept still. That was new too. You are not leaving today, he said after a moment. Not a command. A statement of fact. I let out a small breath. I remember. He studied me, like he was waiting for resistance, for pushback, for something to confirm the boundaries we had both been testing. When it did not come, something in his posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, but enough to matter. There will be someone with you, he added. Outside the main rooms. I glanced toward the hallway, thinking of the men I had seen the day before. I noticed, I said. A pause. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, but something close enough to feel like one. Good, he said again. It was becoming a pattern. That word. Simple. Final. But layered now with something I could not ignore. Lucas tugged at my sleeve again, pulling my attention back to him. He was holding a book, pushing it toward me, his way of asking without asking. I took it, opening it slowly, letting my voice drop into the soft rhythm he responded to, reading words that barely mattered compared to the quiet connection building between us. Sebastian did not leave. He stayed where he was, watching, not interrupting, not controlling, just present. And for the first time since I had stepped into this house, it did not feel like I was being observed. It felt like I was being considered. And that was more dangerous than anything else. By the afternoon, I realized something I had not wanted to admit that morning. This was no longer just a job. Not in the way I had defined jobs before. Not in the way you clock in, do what is asked, and leave untouched. This place did not let you stay untouched, and Sebastian Hale did not let anything exist around him without understanding it completely. Lucas was quieter after lunch, not withdrawn, just thoughtful, his small fingers tracing the edges of a wooden puzzle without actually moving the pieces, like his mind was somewhere deeper than the room we were in. I stayed beside him, close enough that he could lean into me when he needed to, far enough that he still had space to breathe. That balance mattered. It always had. The sun shifted slowly across the glass walls, the light changing from sharp to warm, casting everything in a softer tone that almost made the house feel normal. Almost. I felt it before I saw it again. That presence, steady and unhurried, like time moved differently around him. Sebastian did not stand in the doorway this time. He walked in. Direct. Intentional. And that alone told me something had changed. Lucas noticed too. His hand stilled, the puzzle piece freezing midair before he lowered it slowly, his body leaning closer into my side. I rested my hand lightly against his back, grounding him, grounding myself. Sebastian stopped a few feet away, not too close, not distant either, exactly where he wanted to be. His eyes moved between us, taking in the details, the proximity, the quiet way Lucas chose me without hesitation. He follows you, he said. I shook my head slightly. He stays where he feels safe. Sebastian's gaze lingered on Lucas for a moment, then returned to me, sharper now, more focused. And you, he said, are you safe? The question caught me off guard, not because of the words, but because of the way he asked them, not like an accusation, not like an assumption, but like something he genuinely expected an answer to. I hesitated. That was my first mistake. His eyes narrowed just slightly, enough to tell me he noticed. Of course he noticed. He always did. I am here, I said finally. It was not the answer he asked for. We both knew that. Silence stretched, heavier than before, like something unspoken had settled between us and refused to move. Sebastian stepped closer, just one step, but it shifted the entire space, like the air itself adjusted to accommodate him. That is not what I asked, he said quietly. Lucas shifted again, his fingers tightening slightly against my sleeve, and I realized he could feel it too. The tension, the focus, the weight of a question that was not going to disappear. I exhaled slowly, steadying my voice before I spoke. I am safe enough. The words felt incomplete the moment they left my mouth. Sebastian's expression did not change, but something in his eyes did, something colder, more precise, like he had just found the piece he was missing. Safe enough, he repeated, like he was testing the meaning, turning it over, measuring it against something only he understood. Then he nodded once, sharp and final. That will change. Not a promise. Not a threat. A decision. The kind that does not ask for permission. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from the weight of it, the certainty behind those words, the way they settled into the room like something permanent. You cannot control everything, I said quietly. It was not defiance. It was a boundary, one I had built long before I met him. Sebastian's gaze held mine, steady, unwavering, like he was deciding whether that line meant anything here. No, he said after a moment, but I can control what happens under my roof. There it was. Clear. Undeniable. This was not about me leaving. It was about me staying. About what that meant. About what he had already decided without asking me if I wanted it. Lucas made a small sound beside me, soft, uncertain, and I felt the shift immediately, the tension breaking just enough to remind me where I was, who mattered most in this moment. I turned slightly toward him, my hand moving to his shoulder, grounding him again. It is okay, I murmured. He did not respond, but his body relaxed just enough to tell me he heard it. Sebastian watched that too. The way my attention moved. The way Lucas responded. The connection that had formed without his control. Something in his expression softened again, just a fraction, but enough to matter. He listens to you, he said. He feels heard. I replied. That was the difference. Sebastian considered that, his gaze shifting briefly away, like he was processing something he had not accounted for. When he looked back, there was something new there, something less about control and more about understanding, and that was far more dangerous than anything else. Then you will stay, he said. It was not framed as a question. I let out a quiet breath, feeling the weight of that settle into me, the way everything was slowly being decided around me instead of with me. And yet, I did not immediately push back. That was the part that unsettled me the most. For Lucas, I said, clarifying, grounding, reminding both of us what mattered. Sebastian nodded once. For Lucas, he agreed. But the way he said it told me that was not the only reason anymore. Silence settled again. But it was different now, less tense, more defined, like the boundaries between us had shifted into something neither of us had fully planned but both of us recognized. Sebastian stepped back then, just enough to give space without fully leaving, like even distance was something he measured carefully. There are things you do not know, he said. I glanced at him, cautious now, aware that every word from him carried weight beyond what was spoken. About him? I asked quietly. His gaze flicked to Lucas, then back to me. About what follows you, he said. My chest tightened again, sharper this time, because that was not about Lucas, not really. That was about me. About everything I had tried to leave behind. About everything I had told myself was over. I looked away for a second, just enough to steady myself, to keep my voice even when I spoke again. I am handling it. Sebastian did not respond immediately. When I looked back, his expression had settled into something firm, something unmovable. You were, he said. Now you are not alone. The words landed heavier than anything else he had said so far. Not because of what they promised. Because of what they took away. The illusion that I could manage this on my own. The belief that I had to. Lucas leaned into me again, his small hand finding my sleeve, grounding me in the only way that mattered. I rested my hand over his, steady, present, real. And for the first time, I was not sure if letting someone else step into that space was a mistake, or the only reason I was still standing. That night, I could not sleep. It was not fear that kept me awake. It was the silence. The kind that feels too complete, too controlled, like every outcome has already been accounted for before you even realize you are part of it. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the faint glow of the city lights filtering through the glass, tracing patterns across the walls that shifted every time I blinked. My mind kept circling back to the same thing. You are not alone. The words should have been comforting. They were not. Not entirely. Because being alone had always been something I understood. Something I knew how to survive. But this was different. This was someone stepping into that space without asking, without hesitation, without leaving room for me to say no. And I did not know what to do with that. Sometime after midnight, I gave up on sleep. The house was quiet, but not empty. It never was. I moved through the hallway slowly, my steps soft against the polished floor, instinct guiding me more than thought. I ended up in the kitchen without meaning to. It was the only place that felt almost normal at this hour. Less like a stage, more like something real. I poured myself a glass of water, the sound of it filling the silence in a way that felt louder than it should have. You should be resting. I froze. His voice was low, calm, but it cut through everything. I turned slowly, finding him leaning against the doorway, exactly where I should have expected him to be by now. Watching. Always watching. So should you. I replied quietly. He stepped inside, unhurried, like time adjusted itself around him. I do not sleep much. I believe that. Men like him did not rest. They calculated. They planned. They waited. I took a small sip of water, steadying myself, then set the glass down. Is that why you are here? I asked. His gaze held mine for a moment, unreadable. Partly. Of course. There was always more with him. Layers under layers, none of them accidental. Silence stretched between us again, but it was not uncomfortable anymore. It was expected. Like we were both learning how to exist in the same space without pretending the other was not there. You said there are things I do not know, I said finally. The words felt heavier in the quiet of the night. More honest. More dangerous. Sebastian did not answer right away. He moved closer, stopping just across from me. The counter between us like a line neither of us had decided to cross yet. You were followed last week, he said. My chest tightened instantly. Not from surprise. From confirmation. I noticed, I admitted. His eyes sharpened slightly, like he had expected denial, like honesty changed something in the equation. And you did nothing, he said. It was not a question. I shook my head. I changed my route. I stayed in public places. I handled it. The words sounded smaller now. Less certain. Because standing here, in front of him, I could feel the difference between managing something and actually being safe. Sebastian's gaze did not soften. If anything, it grew more focused. That is not handling it, he said quietly. That is delaying it. The truth of it landed hard, sharper than I wanted to admit. I looked away for a second, my fingers curling slightly against the edge of the counter, grounding myself in something real. I did not have another option, I said. When I looked back, he was watching me differently. Not just observing. Assessing. Understanding. You do now, he said. There it was again. That certainty. That assumption that he could step into something I had spent years learning to navigate on my own. You cannot just take over my life, I said, my voice steady but quieter than I intended. Sebastian did not react the way I expected. No irritation. No pushback. Just that same calm, measured focus. I am not taking it, he said. I am protecting what is under my roof. I let out a breath, slower this time, trying to separate what he was saying from what I was feeling, because they were not the same. And what happens when I leave? I asked. The question hung there, heavier than anything else we had said. For the first time, Sebastian hesitated. Just a fraction. Just enough to notice. His gaze held mine, steady, searching, like he was considering something he had not planned for. You will not leave like this, he said finally. Not avoidance. Not deflection. A statement. The kind that made it clear he had already decided what this meant. My chest tightened again, but differently this time. Not fear. Something closer to recognition. You do not even know everything, I said softly. About me. Sebastian's expression did not change, but his eyes did. Then tell me, he said. Simple. Direct. Like it was the most obvious solution in the world. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was impossible. It does not work like that, I said. He studied me for a moment, then nodded once, like he accepted that answer, even if he did not agree with it. Then I will find out, he said. Of course he would. That was the difference between us. I survived by hiding. He operated by uncovering. Silence settled again, but it felt different now. Not uncertain. Defined. Like we had both stepped into something neither of us could ignore anymore. You should go back to bed, he said after a moment. The words sounded almost gentle. Almost. I nodded, turning slightly, then paused. Why? I asked without looking at him. Why does this matter to you? The question lingered in the space between us, heavier than anything else. I did not expect an answer. Not a real one. Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more controlled than before. Because he chose you, he said. I turned back, meeting his eyes. Lucas. He nodded once. And I do not ignore what he chooses. The answer was simple, but it was not the whole truth. I could see that now. I could feel it in the way his gaze lingered, in the way he did not look away first this time. There was something else there. Something unspoken. Something neither of us was ready to name. I did not push. I just nodded once, turning toward the door again, my mind quieter than it had been all night. As I walked away, I felt it again. That shift, that awareness, like something had locked into place without either of us saying it out loud. And for the first time since I arrived, I realized something that should have unsettled me more than it did. I was no longer just trying to survive this place. I was starting to trust it, and that was far more dangerous than anything I had left behind. The next day did not wait for me to catch up. It moved forward like nothing had changed, like the night before had not shifted something fundamental between us, like the quiet understanding in that kitchen had not rewritten the rules I thought I was living by. But I felt at the moment I opened my eyes. Not fear, not tension, awareness. The kind that settles into your bones and stays there, no matter how still you try to be. I got ready slower than usual, my fingers pausing longer at my sleeves, not because I was unsure, but because I was thinking, replaying his words, measuring them against everything I had learned before I came here. You will not leave like this. It was not control for the sake of control. It was something else. Something I did not fully understand yet. Downstairs, the house was already in motion, but the rhythm felt steadier now, like whatever adjustment had happened was no longer new, just integrated. Lucas was waiting in the same place as yesterday, but this time he was not sitting. He was standing near the window, small frame outlined by the morning light, his fingers pressed lightly against the glass like he was tracing something only he could see. When he heard me, he turned immediately, crossing the room without hesitation, his hand finding my sleeve again, that same quiet anchor he had claimed without asking. I rested my hand over his, grounding him, grounding myself. "Good morning," I said softly. He did not answer, but his grip tightened just slightly, like he needed the confirmation more than the words. I guided him back toward the floor, sitting with him as I always did, keeping everything simple, predictable, safe. But today, even the quiet moments carried something more. A weight, a presence that lingered even when he was not in the room. Sebastian did not appear right away. That was the first difference. The second was how aware I was of his absence. I noticed it in the silence, in the way my attention drifted toward the doorway without meaning to, in the way I found myself listening for footsteps that had not come yet. That unsettled me more than his presence ever had. "Focus," I murmured to Lucas, tapping lightly on the page of the book in front of him. He blinked, then looked down, his fingers moving slowly across the paper, following the shapes like he was trying to make sense of something deeper than letters. That was when I heard it. Not footsteps. A voice. Low. Controlled. Not directed at me. Coming from the hallway. I stilled. Lucas felt it immediately, his body going quiet beside me, his hand tightening against my sleeve. I did not move. I listened. Sebastian's voice was calm, measured, but there was an edge to it, something sharper than usual, something that did not belong to routine conversation. Another voice responded, quieter, harder to make out, but the tone carried tension, urgency, something that did not belong inside these walls. I caught fragments. Confirmed, not far. Waiting, my chest tightened. Not fear. Recognition. That same feeling from last week. Being watched. Being followed. Being just close enough to something you could not see, but knew was there. Lucas shifted again, pressing closer, and I realized he could feel it too, even without understanding the words. I placed my hand over his, steadying him, my voice low. "It is okay." I was not sure if I believed that. The voices in the hallway stopped. Silence followed. Then footsteps. Approaching. I did not turn right away. I waited. When Sebastian stepped into the room, his expression was different. Not colder. Not harsher. Focused in a way that made everything else fade. His eyes found me immediately. Not Lucas. Me. "We need to talk," he said. Not loud. Not urgent. But there was no space in it for delay. Lucas's fingers tightened again. I felt it. The hesitation. The instinct to stay. I looked down at him, softening my voice. "I will be right back." He did not move. Did not let go. I hesitated for a second, then gently eased my sleeve from his grip, placing his hand on the book instead, guiding him back into something familiar. He watched me the entire time. That was new too. I stood, stepping into the hallway, the air shifting immediately, heavier, more defined. Sebastian waited until I was fully outside before speaking again. He was seen near the property this morning. He said, no preamble, no hesitation, just the truth. My chest tightened, sharper this time. Are you sure? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Sebastian's gaze did not waver. I do not deal in uncertainty. Of course he did not. I exhaled slowly, my mind moving faster than my body, piecing together what that meant, what it could lead to, what I had tried to avoid by coming here in the first place. He will not come inside, I said, more to myself than to him. Sebastian took one step closer. He will not get the chance, he replied. The certainty in his voice should have reassured me. It did not. Because this was no longer just about distance. It was about escalation. About lines being drawn in ways that could not be undone. This is not your problem, I said quietly. The words felt weaker than I wanted them to. Sebastian's expression did not change. You are under my roof, he said. That makes it mine. There it was again. That line. That boundary I had not agreed to but could not ignore. I shook my head slightly. You cannot keep extending that to everything, I said. This started before I came here. Sebastian's gaze sharpened, not in anger, but in focus, like I had just given him another piece of something he was already assembling. Then it ends here, he said. Simple. Final. Like it was that easy. Like the past could be cut off from the present just because he decided it would be. I held his gaze, something steady rising in me, something that had nothing to do with fear. You do not know him, I said. You do not know what he will do. Sebastian did not look away. I know enough, he said quietly. And I know this. He paused, just for a second, like he was choosing his words more carefully than usual. He is not the one you should be afraid of anymore. The words landed differently, not because they dismissed the danger, because they shifted it, reframed it, turned it into something I was no longer facing alone. I felt it then, that shift inside me, subtle but real, the line between resistance and acceptance moving just enough to matter. Behind us, I heard a small sound. Lucas. I turned immediately, instinct pulling me back before thought could. Catch up. He was standing in the doorway, small, still, watching us with those sharp green eyes that missed nothing. His gaze moved between us, lingering on me, then on Sebastian, like he was trying to understand something that had not been explained to him yet. I stepped toward him without thinking, kneeling down so I was at his level, my hand reaching for his, grounding him again. It is okay, I said softly. This time, I meant it. Not because nothing was wrong, but because I was not alone in it anymore. Lucas's fingers curled into my sleeve again, familiar, steady, and for the first time since I arrived, I did not feel like I needed to pull away. Lucas did not ask questions, but that did not mean he did not understand. He stood there in the doorway, small hands at his sides, eyes moving between us like he was trying to map something invisible, something shifting that only he could feel. I stayed where I was, kneeling in front of him, my hand still wrapped gently around his, grounding him the way I always did. But this time, it was not just for him. It was for me too. It is okay, I said again, softer now. His gaze stayed on mine for a moment longer than usual, searching, measuring. Then slowly, he stepped closer, pressing into my side like he had done all day, like he had already decided where safety was. I wrapped my arm around his shoulders, holding him there, steady, real. Behind me, I could feel Sebastian's presence, not moving, not interrupting, just watching, but it was different now. Not distant, not calculating in the same way. Something more involved, something more protective. I stood slowly, keeping Lucas close, turning slightly, so he was shielded from the hallway, without making it obvious. That instinct had not left me. It probably never would. We should go back inside, I said quietly. Lucas nodded once, small, controlled, and I guided him back into the room, keeping everything as normal as possible, picking up the book we had left open, settling onto the floor like nothing had happened. But everything had. I could feel it in the way my senses stayed sharp, in the way my attention split between Lucas and the hallway, in the way I listened for movement even when there was none. Sebastian followed a moment later, but he did not step fully inside this time. He stayed near the doorway, leaning slightly against the frame, arms crossed, posture relaxed but deliberate, like he was choosing distance instead of taking it. That alone told me something had changed. Lucas did not look at him right away. He focused on the book, his fingers tracing the page slowly, deliberately, like he was anchoring himself in something simple. I began reading again, my voice steady, soft, the rhythm familiar, but underneath it, there was tension, a current that had not been there before. "You should tell me everything," Sebastian said after a moment. His voice was low, careful not to disrupt Lucas, but it cut through the space anyway. I did not stop reading immediately. I finished the sentence, turned the page, gave Lucas a second to settle before I responded. "There is not much to tell," I said. It was not entirely true. We both knew that. Sebastian did not move. "You were followed. He came here. That is not much." I exhaled slowly, my fingers tightening slightly on the edge of the book. Lucas's hand found my sleeve again, as if he could feel the shift in me before I even acknowledged it. "It was over," I said quietly. Or I thought it was. Silence. He was waiting. Not pushing. Not interrupting. Just waiting. That was new. I glanced at Lucas, then back at the page, keeping my voice even. "I left months ago," I continued. "Changed cities. Changed routines. I stopped answering calls. I stopped responding. Eventually, it got quiet. Sebastian's gaze did not leave me. I could feel it, steady, focused, absorbing every word. "And now it is not," he said. "Not a question. A conclusion." I nodded once. "No." Lucas shifted slightly, his shoulder pressing more firmly against me, and I adjusted my arm around him without breaking the rhythm of the moment. "Why did you not report it?" Sebastian asked. I let out a small breath, something almost like a laugh, but without humor. "Because nothing had happened yet," I said. "Because it is hard to explain something that feels like a shadow. Because sometimes," I paused, choosing my words carefully, aware that Lucas was listening even if he did not understand. "Sometimes you learn to handle things quietly." Sebastian was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, more controlled. "Quiet does not mean safe." The truth of it landed deeper than I expected. I did not argue. Not this time. Instead, I closed the book gently, letting the silence settle in its place. Lucas looked up at me, his eyes searching my face, and I offered him a small, steady smile. "We are done for now," I said softly. He did not move right away. Then, slowly, he leaned into me again, resting his head against my shoulder, like he needed the contact more than the words. I held him there for a moment, then carefully guided him toward the couch, letting him settle into the cushions, covering him lightly with a throw blanket. He did not fall asleep, but he stayed still, watching, present, aware. I stood, turning back toward the doorway. Sebastian had not moved. "You cannot fix everything," I said quietly. It was not resistance. Not entirely. More like a reminder. To him. To myself. His gaze held mine, unwavering. "No," he said. "But I can remove what should not be near you." My chest tightened again, but this time it was not fear. It was something heavier. Something that came with consequences I could not fully see yet. "You do not know where it ends," I said. Sebastian stepped forward then, closing the distance just enough to shift the space between us again, not overwhelming, not forceful, just certain. "I decide where it ends," he replied. The words were quiet, controlled, but they carried weight. Not arrogance. Authority. The kind that does not need to be proven because it already exists. I held his gaze, something steady rising in me, something that refused to be pushed aside. "This is my past," I said. "Not yours." Sebastian's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened, focusing in a way that made everything else fade. "Not anymore," he said. 3 words. Simple. Final. And for the first time, I felt it fully. Not just his control. Not just his presence. But the line he had drawn around me without asking. Around my life. Around my safety. Around everything I had tried to keep separate. Behind us, Lucas shifted on the couch, a small movement, but enough to break the moment. I turned instinctively, checking on him, making sure he was still calm, still grounded. He was watching us again. Quiet. Observing. Learning. I walked back to him, sitting beside him, letting my hand rest lightly on his back, steady, reassuring. He leaned into it immediately, and as I looked back toward Sebastian, still standing there, still watching, I realized something I had not been ready to admit before. This was no longer just about protection. This was about choice. His. and whether I was ready to make one of my own. Choice does not always feel like freedom. Sometimes it feels like standing at the edge of something you cannot fully see, knowing that whatever step you take will change everything that comes after. I felt that as I sat beside Lucas, my hand resting lightly against his back, his small body leaning into mine like it had already decided where it belonged. He did not question it. He did not hesitate. He just stayed. I envied that. The simplicity of it. The certainty. I did not have that anymore. Not here. Not with Sebastian standing across the room, watching in that quiet, deliberate way that made it impossible to pretend he was not already part of the decision I had not made yet. The air felt still, but not empty. Full. Like something was waiting. Lucas shifted slightly, his fingers brushing against my sleeve again, grounding himself, grounding me, and I realized how much that small gesture had become an anchor. Not just for him. For me too. I exhaled slowly, then stood, careful not to disturb him too much, adjusting the blanket around his shoulders before stepping away. He watched me go, his eyes following every movement, but he did not reach out this time. That was new. Trust. Or maybe understanding. I was not sure which one unsettled me more. I walked toward the doorway, toward Sebastian, each step measured, controlled, like I was crossing a line I could not uncross. He did not move. He did not need to. The space adjusted around him, not the other way around. You said this ends here, I said quietly, stopping a few feet away, keeping my voice low so it would not carry back to Lucas. Sebastian's gaze held mine, steady, unshaken. It does, he replied. No hesitation. No doubt. Just certainty. I studied him for a moment, trying to understand what that meant in a way that went beyond words. You cannot control what he does. Outside these walls, I said. It was not a challenge. It was a fact. Sebastian tilted his head slightly, considering me, like he was measuring the weight of that statement. No, he said, but I can control what happens when he gets close. There it was again. That line. That boundary. Not about distance. About consequence. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from the realization of what that implied, of how far he was willing to go without saying it out loud. And what if he does not stop? I asked. Sebastian stepped closer then, just enough to shift the air between us, his presence sharper, more defined. He will, he said. Not a threat. Not a guess. A conclusion he had already reached. I held his gaze, searching for something. Anything that would tell me this was just control, just power, just the same kind of force I had learned to walk away from before. But it was not the same. That was the problem. This did not feel like something I needed to escape. It felt like something I needed to understand. You are making this bigger, I said quietly. It was already big, he replied. The words landed with more weight than I expected. Because he was not wrong. I had just learned to make it smaller. To manage it. To survive it without naming it for what it was. Silence stretched again, but it felt different now. Not uncertain. Defined. Like we were standing on opposite sides of something that had already shifted under our feet. Behind me, I heard Lucas move slightly, the soft rustle of fabric, the quiet sound of him adjusting on the couch. I glanced back instinctively, making sure he was still settled, still calm. He was watching us again. Always watching. Always learning. That grounded me more than anything else. I turned back to Sebastian, my voice steadier now. I need to know what you are doing, I said. It was not a request. It was the closest thing to a boundary I had left. Sebastian's expression did not change immediately. Then, slowly, something shifted, not resistance, not dismissal, but acknowledgement. You will, he said. But not everything at once. Of course. Control did not disappear overnight. Not for him. Not for anyone like him. I nodded once, accepting that for now, even if I did not like it. And, Lucas, I asked. That mattered more than anything else. Sebastian's gaze softened, just slightly, when he looked past me toward his son. He stays with you, he said. Simple. Clear. No hesitation. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. Good, I said quietly. Because that, at least, was something I did not have to question. Sebastian's eyes returned to me, sharper now, more focused. You are part of this now, he said. Not framed as a choice. Not framed as a warning. Just a statement of fact. I felt it settle into me, heavier than anything else he had said, because this time, I did not immediately push against it. That was the difference. That was what changed everything. I did not ask for that, I said softly. Sebastian's gaze held mine, unwavering. Neither did he replied, nodding slightly toward Lucas. The words landed deeper than I expected, because that was the truth I could not ignore. None of this had been planned. Not for Lucas. Not for me. And yet, here we were. I looked away for a second, just enough to gather myself, to steady the part of me that still wanted to hold on to distance, to control, to the illusion that I could step back whenever I wanted. Then I looked at him again. Then do not make this about control, I said. Make it about what matters. Sebastian studied me for a long moment, like he was deciding whether I understood what I was asking for. Then, slowly he nodded. It already is, he said. The certainty in his voice felt different this time. Less like a command, more like a promise. I did not respond right away. I just stood there, feeling the weight of everything that had shifted, everything that had not been said, but was understood anyway. Behind me, Lucas shifted again, and this time he spoke. It was quiet, barely more than a whisper, but it stopped everything. Stay. One word. Soft. Fragile. But it cut through the silence like nothing else could. I turned immediately, my heart catching in a way I could not explain, my eyes finding him on the couch, his gaze locked on mine, uncertain but steady. He had spoken. For the first time since I met him, he had spoken, and he had chosen that word. I felt something break. Open inside me, something I had kept locked down for a long time, something that had nothing to do with fear or survival or control. Something simpler. Something real. I walked back to him slowly, kneeling in front of him, my voice softer than it had ever been. I am here, I said, and for the first time, I meant it in a way that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with choice. For a second, nothing else existed. Not the house. Not Sebastian. Not the quiet tension that had been building all day. Just that one word, soft and fragile, and somehow stronger than anything else in the room. Stay. Lucas's voice was barely above a whisper, but it settled into the space like something permanent, like it had always been there waiting for the right moment to surface. I felt it in my chest before I could react, a sharp, unexpected shift that made it hard to breathe for a second. He was still looking at me, those green eyes steady but uncertain, like he was not sure if the word would be enough to hold me there. I moved closer without thinking, lowering myself in front of him again, my hand finding his, warm and small and real. I am here, I repeated, softer this time, not just for him but for myself too. His fingers tightened around mine, just slightly, like he needed to confirm it was true. Behind me, I felt it, that stillness, that shift in the air that always came when Sebastian stopped observing and started feeling something he could not control as easily. I did not turn right away. I did not want to break the moment. Lucas leaned forward slowly, resting his forehead lightly against my shoulder, his body relaxing in a way I had not seen before, not completely, but enough to matter. I wrapped my arm around him, holding him there, letting the silence settle into something safe, something steady. You did good. I murmured quietly, not making it a big moment, not overwhelming him, just acknowledging what had already changed everything. He did not respond, but he did not pull away either. That was enough. When I finally looked up, Sebastian was still standing where I had left him, but his expression was different. Not controlled in the same way. Not distant. There was something in his eyes I had not seen before. Not power. Not calculation. Something closer to impact. Like what had just happened had reached him in a way he had not expected. He did not speak right away. That alone told me more than anything else. I stood slowly, keeping one hand on Lucas's shoulder, grounding him while I faced Sebastian again. Neither of us said anything for a moment. There was no need. The room had already changed. The lines had shifted. The distance we had been maintaining without acknowledging it had closed in a way that could not be undone. He chose his moment, Sebastian said finally, his voice lower than usual, quieter, like he was aware of the weight of it. I nodded once. He needed to feel safe first, I replied. Sebastian's gaze moved to Lucas, who was still leaning lightly against me, then back to my face. And he does, he said. It was not a question. I held his gaze, steady. He is starting to. That mattered. The difference between safe and starting to feel safe. Sebastian understood that. I could see it in the way his expression tightened just slightly, like he recognized how fragile that line was. Then nothing interrupts that, he said. The words were quiet, but they carried more weight than anything else he had said all day. Not a command. not control. A boundary. One I did not push against. Not this time. Lucas shifted again, his hand sliding back to my sleeve, holding onto it like he always did, but there was something different in the way he did it now. Less searching. More certain. I let out a slow breath, feeling something settle inside me that I had not expected, something steady, something that did not feel like survival anymore. He will need consistency, I said. Patience. Time. Sebastian nodded once, like he was already factoring that in, already adjusting something in the structure of his world to make space for it. He will have it, he said. No hesitation. No doubt. Just certainty. I believed him. That was the part that caught me off guard. Not because of who he was, but because of how easily that belief came. The room fell quiet again, but it was different now. Not tense. Not uncertain. Grounded. Like something had finally aligned. I glanced down at Lucas, brushing my hand lightly over his hair, and he leaned into it without thinking, like the movement had already become familiar. That simple. That natural. I looked back at Sebastian, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. We did not need to. We both knew what had just happened. Not just Lucas speaking, but what it meant. For him. For me. For everything that came next. You were right, I said quietly. The words felt strange, but honest. Sebastian's gaze sharpened slightly. About what? He asked. I held his eyes for a second longer. About this not being over, I said. About it not staying small. A pause. Then, softer, about me not being alone in it. Sebastian did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice was lower, more controlled, but there was something else there too. Something steadier. You are not, he said. No expansion. No explanation. Just truth. I felt it settle into me, deeper than before, not as pressure, not as control, but as something I could stand on if I needed to. And for the first time, I did not push against it. Lucas shifted again, looking up at me now, his expression softer, calmer, like whatever had been holding him back had loosened just enough to let him breathe. Stay. He repeated, quieter this time, like he was testing the word again, making sure it still worked. I smiled, small but real. I am not going anywhere, I said. And this time, there was no hesitation behind it. No second thought. Just truth. Behind me, Sebastian exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, like something in him had settled too, like the weight of the moment had shifted from uncertainty to decision. I did not look back at him right away. I stayed with Lucas, keeping my focus where it needed to be. But I felt it. That change. That alignment. Not perfect. Not simple. But real. And for the first time since I stepped into this house, I was not standing at the edge of something unknown. I was standing inside it. And I was not stepping away. The house did not return to what it had been before. It could not. Something had shifted too deeply, too quietly, like a foundation settling into a new shape that everything else now had to follow. The rest of the day moved forward, but it did not feel like routine anymore. It felt intentional. Every step, every moment, every silence carried meaning now. Lucas stayed close, but not in the same way as before. There was less hesitation in him, less searching, like the word he had spoken had anchored something inside him that had been drifting for too long. He did not repeat it again, but he did not need to. It lingered in everything he did, in the way he reached for my sleeve without looking, in the way he stayed beside me without checking if I was still there. That kind of trust is quiet, but it changes everything. I noticed it most in the small things. The way he followed instructions without pulling back. The way he looked up when I spoke, not just to listen, but to connect. The way his shoulders were no longer as tight as they had been the first day I met him. Healing does not arrive loudly. It settles in, piece by piece, until one day you realize something that used to hurt does not anymore. I stayed with him through the afternoon, keeping everything simple, grounded, familiar. Books, quiet games. The same rhythm I had built carefully, now reinforced by something stronger than routine. Stability. Behind that, I felt it constantly. The awareness. The presence. Sebastian did not interrupt. He did not step in. But he was there. Always there. Not watching in the same way as before. Not measuring. Not testing. More like holding the space. That was new. And it changed the way I moved. The way I thought. The way I felt inside this house. By evening, the light had softened again, stretching long shadows across the floors, the glass walls reflecting a world that felt distant and quiet compared to the one we were inside. Lucas had fallen asleep beside me, his head resting against my arm, his breathing steady, even. I stayed still, not wanting to disturb him, letting the silence settle around us. It was different now. Not empty. Not controlled. Just calm. I had not felt that in a long time. Not like this. I carefully adjusted the blanket over him, easing my arm free slowly, making sure he stayed asleep. When I stood, I felt it immediately. That shift. I turned. Sebastian was there, just a few feet away, closer than usual, but not intruding, his posture relaxed, his presence steady in a way that no longer felt like pressure. He spoke, he said quietly. Not a question. A confirmation. I nodded once. He did. Sebastian's gaze moved to Lucas, lingering there for a moment longer than necessary. Like he was memorizing something. Like he was trying to understand a moment he had been waiting for, but had not known how to reach. He has not done that in a long time, he said. There was something in his voice now. Not just control. Not just certainty. Something quieter. Something personal. I looked at him, really looked this time, past everything I had assumed about him when I first walked into this house. He needed to feel safe first, I said. Sebastian nodded slowly, like he was processing that, like he was recalibrating something he had always approached differently. And you gave him that, he said. The words were simple, but they landed deeper than I expected. I shook my head slightly. I did not give it, I replied. I just stayed long enough for him to find it. That was the truth. Safety is not something you hand to someone. It is something they build when they believe it will not be taken away. Sebastian studied me for a moment, his eyes sharper now, but not in the same way as before. Not assessing. Understanding. Then you stay, he said. Not a command. Not this time. A decision that included me, but did not force me. That difference mattered. I felt it settle in me, not as pressure, but as weight. Real. Solid. Something I could choose to accept or not. I looked down at Lucas, his small hand still loosely curled near the edge of my sleeve, even in sleep, and something in my chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with fear. I already am, I said quietly. When I looked back at Sebastian, something had shifted in his expression again. Subtle. Almost invisible. But there. The distance between us felt different now. Not gone, but changed. Less like a boundary. More like something we were both aware of, and choosing not to cross too quickly. There will be more, he said after a moment. His voice was steady again, grounded, but there was no edge to it now. Just clarity. I did not need to ask what he meant. I already knew. No, I replied. He held my gaze, like he was measuring whether I truly understood what that meant, whether I was ready for it, whether I would stay when it stopped being quiet and controlled and safe. I did not look away. Not this time. Then we handle it, he said. Not I. Not you. We. The words settled between us, heavier than anything else he had said all day. I felt it in the space between us, in the shift that had been building since the moment he saw what I had tried to hide, since the moment Lucas decided I was someone he could trust. Together, I said softly. It was not a question. It was not a promise. It was something in between. Something real. Sebastian nodded once, sharp and final. But this time, it did not feel like control. It felt like agreement. Behind us, Lucas stirred slightly, his fingers tightening briefly against the fabric near my wrist before relaxing again. Even in sleep, he held on. I let out a slow breath, something settling inside me that had been shifting for days now, something that no longer felt like uncertainty. I looked at Sebastian one more time, then back at Lucas, and I understood something I had been avoiding since the moment I arrived. This was no longer about what I was running from. It was about what I was choosing to stay for. And for the first time, that choice did not feel like a risk. It felt like the beginning of something I had not thought was possible anymore. The next morning did not arrive with noise or urgency. It arrived quietly, like everything else that had changed inside this house, steady and certain, as if it already knew what it was becoming. I woke before the sun had fully risen, the soft gray lights stretching across the ceiling, outlining the edges of a life I had not planned but had somehow stepped into anyway. For a moment, I did not move. I just listened. The silence was still there, but it was not the same silence I had feared when I first arrived. It did not feel controlled anymore. It felt protected. That was the difference. And I was part of it now. Not passing through. Not observing from the outside. Part of it. I got dressed slowly, my hands pausing at my sleeves like they always did, but this time, I did not check them twice. I did not pull the fabric down with the same urgency. The marks were still there. The past had not disappeared overnight. But something about how I carried it had changed. Downstairs, the house was already awake, but softer, quieter, like it was moving around something it did not want to disturb. I found Lucas in the same place as the day before, sitting by the window, the early light catching in his hair, his small frame still but not withdrawn. When he saw me, he did not hesitate. He stood, walked straight to me, and this time, when his hand found my sleeve, it did not hold tightly. It rested there. Easy. Certain. I smiled softly, resting my hand over his. "Good morning," I said. He looked up at me, his expression calm, grounded, and then, quietly, clearly, he said, "Morning." 2 words. Simple. But they changed everything. I felt it immediately, the way my chest tightened, not from fear, not from tension, but from something warmer, something that spread slowly and settled deep. "That was good," I murmured, keeping my voice light, steady, not overwhelming him. He nodded once, like it was normal, like it had always been this way. That was the point. It needed to feel normal. I guided him back toward the floor, sitting with him as I always did, letting the moment pass without making it bigger than he could handle. That was how trust worked. It did not need to be celebrated. It needed to be protected. I felt it before I saw him. That shift. But it was different now. Familiar. Not something I braced against. Something I recognized. Sebastian stood in the doorway, not hidden, not observing from a distance, just there, his presence steady, his gaze moving between us before settling on Lucas. "Good morning," he said. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it, controlled but softer, like he understood that volume was not what mattered here. Lucas hesitated for a second, then looked up at him. "Morning," he repeated. The word was clearer this time. Stronger. I glanced at Sebastian, and for a moment, he did not move. He just stood there, like the ground beneath him had shifted in a way he had not expected, but was not resisting. That look in his eyes was not something I could name easily. Not control. Not power. Something closer to realization. He stepped inside slowly, careful, measured, like he was entering a space that required a different kind of presence than he was used to. "You slept well?" he asked Lucas. The question was simple, but it carried weight. Lucas nodded once. "Yes." Another word. Another step. I felt it in the room, the way everything aligned around that small exchange, the way something fragile was being built, piece by piece, moment by moment. I stayed still, letting it happen, not stepping in, not guiding, just present. That mattered too. Sebastian's gaze flicked to me briefly, something unspoken passing between us, acknowledgement, understanding, maybe even gratitude, though he would never say it that way. Then his attention returned to Lucas. "Good," he said. Simple. But this time, it was different. It was not approval. It was recognition. The morning continued in that same quiet rhythm, but everything felt sharper, more defined, like we were all aware of what had changed and what needed to be protected now that it had. Lucas stayed close, but not in the same way as before. He moved with more confidence, more ease, like the space around him had expanded just enough for him to breathe. And I stayed with him, not because I had to, not because it was my job, but because I had chosen to. That was the difference. That was everything. By midday, the house felt lighter, not in structure, not in presence, but in something harder to name, something that settled into the spaces between us and made everything feel possible. I found myself standing by the window for a moment, watching the world outside, the distance, the movement, the life that had once felt like the only place I belonged. It did not feel the same anymore. Not because it had changed. Because I had. "You were thinking about leaving." His voice came from behind me, low, steady, not accusatory, just observant. I turned slowly, meeting his gaze. Sebastian stood a few feet away, closer than before, but not crowding, his posture relaxed, his eyes focused in a way that told me he was not guessing. He was reading me. I shook my head slightly. I said honestly. Before. A pause. Then, quieter, not now. He studied me for a moment, like he was measuring the truth of that, like he was deciding whether to believe it or simply accept it. "Why?" he asked. The question was simple, but it held everything. I looked past him for a second, toward Lucas, who was sitting on the floor, flipping through a book, calm, present, safe in a way he had not been before. Then I looked back at Sebastian. Because he needs consistency, I said. Because he chose me. I paused, letting the truth settle before I added, softer. And because I am choosing to stay. Silence followed, but it was not heavy. It was complete. Sebastian nodded once, sharp and final, but there was no edge to it this time. No control, just acceptance. Then you stay, he said. Not a command, not a condition. A fact we had both agreed on without needing to say it any other way. I let out a slow breath, something in me settling fully for the first time since I walked into this house. Something that had been shifting piece by piece now finally still. Behind us, Lucas looked up, his eyes finding mine, then Sebastian's, then back again, like he was confirming what he already knew. I stepped back toward him, kneeling beside him, my hand resting lightly against his shoulder. He leaned into it without hesitation. I looked at Sebastian one last time, and in that moment, I understood something I had not been able to see clearly before. He did not step into my life to control it. He stepped into it because he had already decided I was part of his world. And for the first time, that did not feel like something I needed to fight. It felt like something I could stand beside. Lucas's fingers found my sleeve again, light, steady, certain, and I covered his hand with mine, grounding him, grounding myself, no longer holding on to the past the same way, no longer trying to disappear into it. Because sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is not walk away. Sometimes, it is choosing where you belong and staying there.